What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors completely loses his composure on live television? The Graham Norton Show has seen its share of awkward moments. But nothing could have prepared the audience for what unfolded when Matt Damon sat down on that famous red couch. What started as light banter quickly spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable exchanges in talk show history. And by the end, Damon was on his feet, voice raised, demanding answers that Norton simply could not provide. Before we get into exactly what set him off, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. Because this story has layers that go deeper than anyone expected. The evening began innocently enough. Matt Damon walked onto the set to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd with that familiar boyish charm that has defined his career for decades. He settled into the couch next to two other guests, a British comedian known for sharp wit and a young actress promoting her latest film. Graham Norton, ever the consummate host, opened with his usual warmth, complimenting Damon on his recent project and asking about his experience filming in Europe. Damon responded with practiced ease, sharing a funny anecdote about getting lost in Budapest and accidentally wandering into a stranger's apartment. The audience laughed, Norton grinned, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But then, Norton shifted gears. He brought up a topic that had been circulating in the press for weeks. A controversial statement Damon had made during a podcast interview about the changing landscape of Hollywood and how actors are now expected to navigate social media and public opinion in ways they never had to before. Norton's question seemed harmless on the surface, almost playful. He asked Damon if he felt that actors today were being held to impossible standards, if every word they said was being dissected and weaponized. Damon's expression changed almost immediately. The smile faded, his posture stiffened, and there was a long pause before he responded. He said that Norton was oversimplifying what he had actually said, that the podcast had been a nuanced conversation about the pressures of modern fame, and that reducing it to a soundbite was exactly the problem he had been describing. Norton, sensing the tension but trying to keep things light, made a joke about how soundbites were essentially his entire job. The audience laughed nervously. Damon did not laugh. Instead, he leaned forward and asked Norton directly if he had actually listened to the full podcast or if he was just repeating what he had read in a tabloid headline. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Norton clearly caught off guard, stumbled through a response about how his team prepares notes for him and that he tries to stay informed about his guests, but that he could not possibly consume every piece of media they produce. It was a reasonable answer, diplomatic even, but Damon was not satisfied. He pressed further, asking if Norton thought it was fair to bring up a topic on national television without fully understanding the context. If that was not exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior that damages careers and reputations. The other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The comedian tried to interject with a lighthearted comment about how everyone takes things out of context these days. But Damon cut him off, his voice rising slightly as he said he was not talking to him. He was talking to Graham. Norton attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, suggesting they move on and talk about Damon's upcoming film, but Damon refused to let it go. He said that this was important, that he was tired of being misrepresented, tired of having his words twisted and then being expected to smile and play. Along when confronted about things he never actually said. Norton, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to explain that he meant no disrespect, that the question was meant to open a dialogue, not to attack. Damon shot back, asking what kind of dialogue could possibly come from a question based on incomplete information. If Norton was interested in a real conversation or just looking for a viral moment, the atmosphere in the studio had completely shifted. What had been a lively, jovial set now felt tense and hostile. The audience was silent, unsure whether to laugh or gasp. Norton, to his credit, did not back down entirely. He said that Damon was being unfair, that talk shows operate on a certain format and that guests understand this when they agree to appear. He pointed out that Damon had been on the show before and had never seemed to have a problem with how things were handled. Damon responded by saying that maybe he should have spoken up sooner, that just because he had gone along with it in the past did not mean he was obligated to keep doing so, especially when he felt he was being cornered into defending a position. He never took Norton asked what exactly Damon wanted from him, if he expected a public apology or a retraction. Damon said he wanted Norton to acknowledge that he had not done his homework, that he had brought up a sensitive topic without proper preparation, and that this kind of lazy journalism, even on a talk show, contributes to a culture where people are judged and condemned without due process. Norton bristled at the word journalism, reminding Damon that he was a talk show host, not a journalist, and that there was a difference. Damon fired back, asking if that difference meant Norton could say whatever he wanted without accountability. If entertainment was a free pass to be careless with the truth, the exchange was escalating rapidly, and the producers were clearly panicking. You could see crew members hovering near the edge of the set, unsure whether to intervene. The young actress looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. The comedian had gone completely silent. His earlier bravado evaporated. Norton, his face flushed, tried once more to de-escalate, saying that perhaps they could discuss this more privately after the show, that airing it out on camera was not productive for anyone. Damon stood up, his voice now loud enough to echo through the studio, and said that was exactly the problem, that everything was always behind closed doors, always smoothed over and swept away, and that maybe it was time someone actually said what they were thinking in the moment, instead of pretending everything was fine. Norton remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, trying to maintain some semblance of control over his own show. He told Damon that he understood he was upset, but that standing up and shouting was not going to resolve anything, that they were both professionals and could handle this like adults. Damon laughed, a sharp, humorless sound, and said that was rich coming from someone who had just ambushed him with a loaded question based on misinformation. Norton's eyes narrowed, and for the first time that evening, his famous composure began to crack. He said he had not ambushed anyone, that Damon had agreed to come on the show knowing full well that current events and recent interviews were fair game for discussion. Damon stepped closer to the host's chair, not threateningly, but close enough that the physical distance between them had shrunk to almost nothing. He asked Norton if he truly believed that, if he honestly thought that twisting someone's words and then acting innocent when called out was just part of the game. Norton stood up now too, matching Damon's posture, and said that he had twisted nothing, that Damon's words from the podcast were public record, and that anyone could listen to them and draw their own conclusions. Damon's jaw tightened, and he said that was exactly his point, that people should listen to the full conversation instead of reacting to cherry-picked quotes designed to generate outrage. The British comedian, perhaps sensing an opportunity to lighten the mood, or perhaps just unable to bear the tension any longer, tried again to jump in with a joke about how he never said anything interesting enough to be missed. Neither Damon nor Norton acknowledged him. Their focus was entirely on each other now. Locked in a battle of wills that had transcended the original disagreement and become something more personal, Norton said that if Damon felt so strongly about being misunderstood, perhaps he should be more careful about what he said in public forums. That celebrities did not have the luxury of speaking carelessly and then complaining when people paid attention. Damon's face reddened, and he asked if Norton was seriously suggesting that he should self-censor, that he should water down his opinions to avoid being deliberately misconstrued by people who profit from controversy. Norton shot back that he was not suggesting anything of the sort, but that Damon needed to accept that words have consequences and that public figures are subject to public scrutiny. Damon asked if that scrutiny included being confronted on live television by someone who had not bothered to understand the full context of what they were scrutinizing. Norton said he had understood perfectly well that Damon had made comments about how actors were being held to unreasonable standards, and that he had simply asked if Damon stood by those comments. Damon shook his head and said that was not what he had said, that Norton was doing it again right now, reducing a complex discussion to a binary question that misrepresented his actual position. The audience was completely silent now, utterly transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. This was not the playful banter they had come to expect from the Graham Norton Show. This was raw, unscripted conflict, and nobody knew how it would end. Norton took a deep breath and said that perhaps they were talking past each other, that maybe both of them had valid points, and they were just approaching the issue from different angles. Damon said he did not want to hear platitudes, that Norton had started this by bringing up a topic he was not prepared to discuss properly, and that now Norton wanted to play peacemaker after stirring the pot. Norton's voice rose for the first time, matching Damon's intensity, as he said that he had not stirred anything, that Damon was the one who had turned a simple question into a full-blown confrontation. He said that if Damon could not handle being asked about his own public statements, then perhaps he should not be giving interviews at all. Damon stepped even closer and said that he could handle being asked about his statements just fine. What he could not handle was being asked about statements he never made, being expected to defend positions he never took, all for the sake of entertainment. Norton said that was not what was happening, that Damon was being paranoid and defensive, and that this whole outburst was proving his critics right about him being thin-skinned. That last comment hit a nerve. Damon's entire demeanor changed, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register as he asked Norton if he really wanted to go there. If Norton really wanted to make this personal, Norton, perhaps realizing he had crossed a line but unwilling to back down now, said that Damon had made it personal the moment he accused him of being a lazy journalist. Damon corrected him, saying he had accused him of lazy preparation, not lazy journalism, but that if Norton wanted to take it as a personal insult, that was his choice. Norton said that accusing someone of not doing their homework in front of millions of viewers was absolutely a personal insult, and that Damon owed him an apology. Damon laughed again, that same bitter sound, and said he owed Norton nothing. He said that if anyone deserved an apology, it was him for being put in this position in the first place. Norton asked what position exactly. The position of being a guest on one of the most popular talk shows in the world. The position of being given a platform to promote his work and share his thoughts. Damon said the position of being set up to fail, of being baited into a defensive stance and then criticized for defending himself. Norton threw his hands up and said that nobody had set Damon up for anything, that he had come on the show of his own free will, and was now acting like a victim because he did not like the questions. The young actress finally spoke up, her voice small and trembling, suggesting that maybe everyone should take a break and cool down. Damon turned to her, his expression softening slightly, and said he appreciated the sentiment, but that some things needed to be said. Norton seized on this moment of distraction to try once more to regain control, telling the audience that they were going to take a quick break and would be right back. But Damon immediately said no, that they were not taking a break. That if Norton wanted to have this conversation on air, then they were going to finish it on air. Norton looked toward the producers, clearly hoping for intervention. But Damon continued speaking. He said that this was the problem with modern media, that everyone wanted the drama and the conflict, but nobody wanted to actually deal with the consequences. He said that Norton had thrown a grenade into the conversation and now wanted to cut to commercial before it exploded. Norton protested that he had done no such thing, that he had asked a legitimate question and Damon had overreacted. Damon asked if Norton truly believed that, if he genuinely could not see how his question had been designed to provoke. Norton said it had been designed to engage, not to provoke, and that there was a difference. Damon said the difference was semantic, and that Norton knew exactly what he had been doing. Norton finally sat back down, exhaustion evident in his voice, as he said that he did not know what else Damon wanted from him. Damon remained standing and said he wanted Norton to admit that he had not fully researched the topic before bringing it up, that he had relied on second-hand accounts and headlines instead of listening to the actual source material. Norton was quiet for a long moment before saying that his team had prepared notes, based on multiple sources, and that he trusted their research. Damon pounced on that, asking if Norton was now blaming his staff, if he was going to hide behind his researchers instead of taking responsibility himself. Norton's face flushed deeper, and he said he was not hiding behind anyone, that he was simply explaining how television production worked, that hosts relied on their teams, and that this was standard practice across the industry. Damon said that might be standard practice, but it did not make it right, and it certainly did not absolve Norton of responsibility for what came out of his own mouth. Norton asked if Damon had ever made a mistake, if he had ever spoken without having every single fact perfectly verified, if he had never relied on information provided by others. Damon said of course he had, but that when he made mistakes, he owned them instead of making excuses, and that was all he was asking Norton to do now. Norton stood up again, his patience clearly at its limit, and said that he was not going to apologize for doing his job, that asking guests about their recent public statements was literally what talk show hosts did, and that if Damon could not accept that, then perhaps he should not have agreed to appear. Damon said that was a cop-out. that hiding behind the format of a talk show did not excuse sloppy preparation or misrepresentation. Norton said nothing had been misrepresented, that everything he had asked about was based on words that had actually come out of Damon's mouth during a recorded podcast that thousands of people had heard. Damon's voice rose again as he said that context mattered, that the words themselves were only part of the equation, and that stripping away the surrounding conversation changed the entire meaning. Norton asked how he was supposed to provide full context in a 5-minute segment. If Damon expected him to play the entire hour-long podcast before asking a single question, Damon said he expected Norton to either do the work required to understand the topic or not bring it up at all, that there was no middle ground here. Norton said that was an impossible standard, that no talk show host in the world operated that way, and that Damon was being completely unreasonable. Damon said maybe the entire system was unreasonable then. Maybe the fact that this was considered normal was exactly the problem he had been trying to highlight in the podcast, that Norton clearly had not understood the circular nature of their argument was becoming apparent even to them, but neither seemed willing or able to break the pattern. Norton said they were going in circles and getting nowhere, that this had become a pointless argument about preparation and responsibility that had nothing to do with the original question. Damon said it had everything to do with the original question, that the question itself was the problem, that it was built on a faulty foundation, and therefore any answer he gave would be equally flawed. Norton rubbed his face with both hands and said he genuinely did not understand what Damon wanted anymore, that every attempt he made to find common ground or move forward was met with more accusations and anger. Damon sat back down finally, but his body language remained tense, coiled like a spring ready to release at any moment. He said that what he wanted was simple. He wanted Norton to acknowledge that the question had been based on incomplete information and that putting a guest in that position was unfair. Norton, still standing, said that he could not acknowledge something he did not believe to be true, that from his perspective the question had been entirely fair, and based on publicly available information that Damon himself had provided. Damon closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again there was something different in his expression, something harder and more resolved. He said that this conversation had revealed something important, that it had exposed the fundamental disconnect between how media figures like Norton operated and how the people they interviewed experienced those interactions. He said that Norton genuinely seemed to believe he had done nothing wrong, and that was perhaps the most troubling part of all, because it meant this would keep happening, to him and to countless others, and there would never be any accountability because people like Norton truly could not see the problem. Norton said that was unfair, that he was not some villainous media manipulator, that he was a talk show host trying to have interesting conversations with interesting people, and that sometimes those conversations touched on sensitive topics. Damon said sensitive topics required sensitive handling, and that Norton had handled this particular topic with all the grace of a sledgehammer. Norton said that Damon was being overdramatic, that this entire incident would be forgotten in a week, and that nobody watching at home cared about the nuances of podcast context or research methodology. Damon said that was where Norton was wrong, that people did care that audiences were smarter than Norton gave them credit for, and that they could see through lazy questions and manufactured controversy. Norton said if audiences were so smart, then they would understand that this entire argument was ridiculous, and that both he and Damon were acting like children. The British comedian, who had been silent for so long that viewers might have forgotten he was there, suddenly spoke up and said that actually, from where he was sitting, it seemed like both of them had valid concerns and were just expressing them badly. Damon and Norton both turned to look at him, and for a moment it seemed like his intervention might actually help. But then Damon said that while he appreciated the attempt at mediation, this was not about both sides having valid concerns. This was about Norton refusing to admit a mistake. The comedian shrank back into the couch. Clearly regretting his decision to speak, Norton said he was not refusing to admit a mistake because he had not made one, that Damon was trying to bully him into a false confession just to satisfy his own ego. Damon's eyes widened, and he asked if Norton had just accused him of bullying. If Norton seriously thought that calling out poor journalism was the same as bullying, Norton said it was not journalism. He had already explained that, and that, yes, standing up and shouting and refusing to accept any explanation did constitute bullying behavior. Damon said that was absurd, that he was the one who had been put on the spot with a misleading question, and that defending himself against that was not bullying. It was self-preservation. Norton said that if this was what Damon considered self-preservation, then perhaps he needed to reevaluate his approach, that he had turned a minor moment into a major incident that would now define this entire episode. Damon said good, that maybe it should define the episode, that maybe it was important for people to see what happened when someone refused to play along with the game. Norton asked what game, what grand conspiracy Damon thought he was exposing. Damon said it was not a conspiracy, it was just laziness and carelessness dressed up as entertainment, and that he was tired of pretending it was acceptable. Norton looked directly into the camera and said that he wanted to apologize to the viewers at home for this awkward situation, that this was not what anyone had expected or wanted from tonight's show. Damon immediately said that Norton should not apologize to the viewers, he should apologize to him. Norton turned back to Damon and said he had nothing to apologize for, that he had asked a question, Damon had exploded, and now they were both stuck in this nightmare scenario that neither of them knew how to escape from. Damon said the escape was simple. All Norton had to do was admit he had not done proper research before asking the question. Norton said he had done exactly as much research as he did for every guest, and that if that was not enough for Damon, then that was Damon's problem, not his. The stalemate was complete. Neither man would budge, neither would concede even the smallest point to the other. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure if they should applaud or leave. The other guests looked like hostages waiting for rescue, and through it all, the cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second of a talk show appearance that had gone so far off the rails that there was no conceivable way to bring it back on track. Norton finally said that they were out of time, that the show had to end, and that he hoped Damon's film did well despite this disaster. Damon said he did not need Norton's well wishes, that his film would succeed or fail on its own merits, not because of anything that happened here tonight. As the credits began to roll and the theme music started to play, both men remained locked in their positions, neither willing to extend a hand or offer a final word of reconciliation. The audience began to applaud, uncertain and scattered, and slowly the two other guests stood and made their way off the stage, clearly desperate to escape the toxic atmosphere that had consumed the studio. What had started as a simple question about Hollywood expectations had devolved into a battle of egos and principles that left no winners, only damage and discomfort in its wake. So, what do you think really happened here? Was Matt Damon justified in his reaction, or did he take things too far? Was Graham Norton just doing his job, or should he have been better prepared? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you hit that subscribe button, because stories like this don't tell themselves. And we'll be here to break down every moment of drama that comes out of Hollywood and beyond. Let us know who was in the wrong here, Damon or Norton, and why do you think this situation escalated the way it did?